I'm Dan Aguire here on the Barroom Network. We're all looking ahead to the 2023 Chicago Bears. In fact, I'm still trying to get my way to that Green Bay game in week 1, which I hope is the start of a new era. The time for getting our asses kicked for 30 straight years, that's got to be over now, right? Have I already done my time? I think we all have. It's time to start winning. And I can only hope, because the Chicago Bears won the Super Bowl way back in 1985, which everybody knows is like 38 years ago, but yet we still talk about the 85 Bears, have so much affinity because not only were they great, they were great stories and great visually, and sacks and Jim McMahon and Walter Payton and the Fridge. Mike Ditka, he had so many stories, and it's so indelibly trapped in our minds in a good way. But I can only hope in 38 more years that A, I'll still be alive, and B, we're talking about the 2023 Chicago Bears, Super Bowl champions, baby. That's what we want this season. High hopes going into this with Justin Fields. But if you can go back in time with me now, well, one more time, let's take a look at the Chicago Bears in 1985 and maybe dissect, in case you've missed it, the reasons, because they were plentiful, like 38 things had to go wrong for them not to win a second or third Super Bowl. And this is a look back of why the 1985 Chicago Bears didn't repeat or even get another one. I watched the Bears documentary 85 the other day. I had seen it once before. It's the one that went to the theater, not the 30 for 30 that Vince Vaughn voiced over on ESPN. Not that one. There's two different ones. The one just called 85 features President Obama, Bill Murray, George Wendt, the super fans. It mixes in pop culture. So my point is, with that film, you could be, say, just a casual fan and not necessarily a diehard, and still enjoy what they're talking about because it's a blend of the players and the pop culture people. So it's fun. And I was asking Shane and Phil which one they thought was better. And both of those gentlemen both stated they hadn't seen the 185. If you haven't seen it, if you're listening and you're like, wow, that's pretty interesting, you should check it out. It's like $10 now on eBay to buy. I got it on Blu-ray the day it came out. So I paid like $25 for it. But anyway, the point is, my criticism of both films, the 30 for 30 and 85, was that neither one of them sort of extrapolated or broke down why the Bears didn't win 2 Super Bowls, why the Bears didn't win 3 Super Bowls, why didn't they go back to back. And see, I was only 5 in 1985, so someone like Mike North would say, oh, he's just a kid, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And maybe in most instances that would be true, but I'd like to think that isn't the case in this particular situation, because I went back and basically watched every game. I circumvented time, and I've seen, like, for example, I've got all the 85 games. I've got the majority of the 84, 86, 87, 80. I saw it later, although I came in for myself in 87 as a kid, but, you don't see the things the same way as you do now. But the point is, over the last decade, I've saw all these games, and I try to watch them from the prism of, okay, this is, say, 1986, week 12, the big cheap shot. I try to watch it as if I'm living in the moment and not watching it in, like, when I first saw it ever, 99 or whatever it was. And I would read the story on the Chicago Tribune or Sun-Times website, the post-game story with it. So the point is, I really just immerse myself in, unfortunately, like somebody like Aldo lived through it, and saw it as an adult, but I didn't. So I'd like to think I've gone back as best I can to be thorough, and I've seen, like, basically every Bears playoff game since 77, and I've seen all these games from Walter through when I started, essentially. Not every one of them, but definitely the lion's share of them. So having said that, I'd like to think I'm qualified to make an educated opinion and have a discussion on what the fall of this team was. Now, again, I feel like someone like Mike North would just fucking defecate all over me. And maybe I deserve it. Maybe I deserve unhappiness. I don't know. But frantically, I tell you that I think I could have a discussion about this, and I'm going to quit apologizing for it, and here it is. So why didn't the Bears do more? Why did they only win one Super Bowl? Because if you watch the 30 for 30 from a few years ago, which of course it focused on Buddy Ryan, and sentimentally that's cool. And they just sort of glossed over what happened and don't even really acknowledge, like, for example, that the Bears were in the championship game in '88. I mean, that's one game from the Super Bowl, and you had bear weather. You got like 8-degree weather, and you think that they could win. They could go to Super Bowl 23. It's plausible, but it's glossed over, and it's like just forgotten from time, and not even consider what exactly happened at this point. And then the 85, when they don't even talk about Charles Martin or anything. So again, that was the genesis of this thought, was what happened? What possibly could have derailed the team that averaged an age of 24 years old on paper, the youngest team in the league to win the Super Bowl, 15-1. Everybody knows the story. You don't allow a point in the postseason, and you win the Super Bowl 46-10. And the only reason they got 3 points off of that was off Walter's fumble in the first quarter, deep in the Bears' own territory. And then later, with like the third string defense, and they scored much later in the game. So it could have been a shutout. That would have been something. But hey, they're Super Bowl 20 champions. So what happens? Now, the common thing that people start to talk about is, Jim McMahon, he got the big head. Jim McMahon came in out of shape. McMahon says that his own self. He came in 25 pounds heavier than what he did in 1985. But if you, again, dive in for context on that, different era. In this time period, you came into camp to get into shape. Versus today, where they really don't have 2-a-days or 3-a-days, and they're not beating the fuck out of each other all day in Platteville, Wisconsin. So you're expected to be in shape all year, say, for the 2019 Bears. But in 1986, it wasn't that way. And McMahon wrote a book. He wrote a book in between 85 season and 86 season, which vilified him with the front office. So that was the first shot fired. But in the book, he talked about, the weight gain that he said, he worked that shit off before week 1 against the Browns. He worked that weight off. But he predicted in the book. Now, I haven't read the book in 20 years almost. But off the top of my head, he basically calls out Michael McCaskey in the Bears front office and says, the only thing that will stop us is if the front office takes the team apart, and he kind of intimated that they would. And as we'll get into it, they did. But there's more to it than that. So McMahon comes in what they perceive to be too heavy, and that's like the narrative now. But okay, he works himself into shape. They beat the Browns opening day in a shootout. The Browns, of course, had won a playoff game, or actually had a big lead in the playoff game against the Dolphins, I think 21-3, and they ended up losing in the second round the previous year, coached by Schottenheimer. But they're going to go to the AFC Championship game this year, so they're not scrubs. A big explosion of points. I don't know the score off the top of my head. I can look that up if I need to. Whatever. I'm not trying to throw statistics at you. We're just having a discussion. So as the season's going to progress, McMahon is going to complain about his shoulder not feeling well. This is a huge point. McMahon is saying that his shoulder is sore. And again, that's unrelated to gratuitous weight or anything like that. And there's sort of a division that's going to manifest between, you always hear about the offense versus the defense, but the defense, like specifically Dan Hampton, was basically saying, hey, McMahon, when are you going to fucking practice? When are you going to play? When are you going to be a man? So all this animosity is really starting to build. And Jim's saying that he's going to the Bears doctors and he's saying, hey, my arm's really, really sore. What the fuck is going on? They're saying there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you whatsoever. Well, as the season would go on, he kind of feels pressured to be the leader and to shut people like Hampton up. whom he respected, but of course, he's got to feel insulted by it. Like, hey, I'm giving you, I was on the field with a lacerated kidney in 1984 and could barely stand, and I'm playing. And now you're saying that I have no heart. So comes to week 12, the Green Bay game. Something, again, that it's got to be discussed whenever you look at the downfall of this team. Because Jim McMahon, people nowadays say, well, Jim really wasn't that good of a quarterback. He didn't really have a big arm, and he just fit the team and the times and kind of got lucky because the defense was so good. Shit like that just unnerves me. Because McMahon won, I think off the top of my head, like 28 consecutive starts. 28 starts in a row. And the one they lost was a Monday night game in Denver, which we'll come to that later, because Kevin Butler missed 2 extra points. So the point is, McMahon's playing. McMahon is a winner. The Bears are winning, whether you want to say it's all the defense or whatever. That's horseshit, too. For example, 1985, the Bears are ranked second in offense overall. Versus, of course, conversely, the number 1 ranked defense. But in 1986, McMahon gets body slammed. Of course, you've heard about it, but Charles Martin, whom passed away, I think, in like 2005, and I'm not going to lie, I read it at the time and thought, good, fuck him. But that idea is not solicited by the Bears Bar Room or advocated by anybody associated with the Bears Bar Room, and I apologize to anyone in Mr. Martin's family if they would hear that, but that was my initial instinct, being the meathead Bears fan who lamented over this play, being a journey, being the kind of play that stopped them from going on the journey that they could have gone on, and I'm talking about back-to-back titles. It altered the franchise. Now, see, what happens is McMahon gets picked off, and then behind him, Martin comes up, grabs him, and slams his arm, his already injured shoulder, onto the old AstroTurf of Soldier Field. Now, this was like 20 seconds after the play was over. And what made it even worse is Martin had this towel with certain people's numbers on it. I think it was like Willie Gault, Walter, for fuck's sake. They had cheap shot at him in 85 and Suey. So, and of course, Jim McMahon. So he's boasting that he's going to hurt these players, his quote-unquote hit list. And Charles Martin's from like Livingston College. He's nobody. So imagine in today's, like, some fucking bum from the Packers says, well, I'm going to take out Mitch. And then he does it. Could you imagine that? Or if somebody on the Bears over the years when the Packers were just beating the fuck out of us every year said, fuck it, we're going to cheap shot Rodgers and we're going to take him down, and then did it. Could you imagine what would happen in today's world? What happened in 1986? Charles Martin was suspended for like 2 games. And after the play's over, Forrest Gregg, the head coach, whom had some success, he took the Bengals to Super Bowl 16 as head coach. He played alongside Ditka in Dallas. He was a member of the old Vince Lombardi Packers, whom you would think would have more poise and more dignity to not advocate such a dirty play, but that's not what happened. When Charles Martin makes the play, he goes to the sidelines, everyone's high-fiving him. So this was universally advocated by the entire franchise. That's how much they hated the Bears. That's how much they hated Jim McMahon. That's how much they hated Mike Ditka. So they sought out to end this dynasty, this potential dynasty from percolating, and they stopped that by this just egregiously dirty play. So McMahon comes to the sidelines. He tries to walk it off. He's not even really sure because his arm's been hurt the whole season, as I already stated. His arm has been hurt, and you can see him. He's trying to warm up on the sidelines. He attempts to finish the game. Why? Because this motherfucker was tough. But you don't hear about that now. You just, he was always hurt. He was always hurt. The man had balls. The guy had an incredible amount of bravery for his size, for anybody's size. He tried to finish the game. He couldn't. After the game, the Bears are still suggesting he's not really that hurt. So Jim says, fuck this. He goes and sees his own doctor out in Los Angeles. And then ultimately they're like, whoa, your arm is fucked. So I think it was his rotator cuff that was what that needed to be repaired off the top of my head. But and the end result was he had to have a major shoulder surgery. And we're talking about a surgery that would take him from November of 86 until October of 87 again, just to be back on the field. Almost a full calendar year before Jim McMahon would be back on the field. Now, he has some success, which we'll move into in a minute when he does come back. But for all intensive purposes, this ended his run as a franchise quarterback. He was never the same again in terms of his pure passing ability. Now, you could say, well, he was throwing ducks anyway. Okay, whatever. But he wasn't as good. He had moments. He was on the cover of Sports Illustrated a few times after the Bears had traded him with the Eagles. He had some moments, some big games here and there. Randall Cunningham was hurt in 91 on opening day, so Jim played a lot that season, and I think he got the cover like 2 times. It was like comeback player of the year. So he had some moments, but he never could sustain that success, and most of that stemmed from Charles Martin. So if we're looking at the 86 team, there's more to it than that as well. But you're without Jim now. You say, okay, well, they were out without Jim in 1984. True. Steve Fuller played in RFK Stadium, and the Redskins, that was the first time the Redskins had ever been beaten in a playoff game at RFK Stadium. So the Bears had beaten them on the road before with Steve Fuller. By this time, Mike Tomczak is in his second year, and he's getting some starts. Like, for example, in 86, Week 2 was the game against Buddy. The Buddy, of course, left after the Super Bowl, becomes the Eagles head coach. Week 2, he comes into Soldier Field. Already, Week 2. And Tomczak had to play that game because Jim got banged up in the Browns loss, or the Browns victory. I'm sorry. And Tomczak struggled, but the Bears would win in overtime 13-10. But still, Mike would end up being, a decent quarterback. At the time, I didn't appreciate him as much as I should have, but I never thought Mike was good enough to be the starter. But maybe if he does play in the Redskin game, maybe. But we'll get to that. So Jim's hurt, and you got the guy that's won a playoff game before, and you've got the young guy undrafted from Ohio State. You've got Mike Tomczak, but they're going to get Doug Flutie, and everybody shits on Doug Flutie too. He's not tall enough, and the team didn't want him. All that, I guess, is accurate. And Doug, at this point of his career, hadn't had CFL championships or even success with the Buffalo Bills. It hadn't been around forever. Right now, at this point, he's just known for the day after Thanksgiving in 84 with the Hail Mary to beat Bernie Kosar and the Hurricanes, and basically clinching the 1984 Heisman Trophy that day with the Hail Mary again from the 50-yard line to beat the Hurricanes. That's basically what he's known for at the time. And because of his height, and because it's a different era of football, you didn't have, even Steve Young hasn't become Steve Young yet. Not that he was that short, but I'm talking about, I guess in the 70s you did have Fran. But for the most part, you didn't necessarily have Randall Cunningham yet, the quarterback that's just going to take off and run for 1,000 yards, which Flutie is, although he's not as tall or as big, is probably capable of getting a lot of yards in any given season at that point of his life. But they signed Flutie. He plays, I think he started in Detroit to end the season on Monday night. So Mike is going to start. A controversial decision, as you know, everybody knows that Flutie played in the playoff game. And in the 85 30 for 30, everyone kind of blames Doug for it. And he did throw 3 picks. And I'm not absolving him for struggling. But given the fact that Doug had only been there for a month or month and a half, look, I love Ditka as much as anybody, but maybe the team's right in saying that he was sort of Mike's pet project. They had Thanksgiving together in 86. They ate food together when you're supposed to be with your family. But maybe he shouldn't have played the game. I don't know. But he did have one. He threw a big touchdown to Galt in the second quarter, and the Bears actually had a lead at that point going into halftime in that game, I think 13-7. They could have won this game. But the one thing I wanted to point out about this, not just that Jim is missing, and that Flutie's playing, or maybe Tomzak should have played, maybe Fuller should have played. Again, we got Flutie, though. What happens in the game? The 86 defense is, on paper, better than the 85 defense. I do have one printout because I didn't want to get the stat wrong. It says, and this is from Pro Football, not Pro Football Focus, but Pro Football Reference. The Bears allowed 187 points as a team, the fewest surrendered by any team in the 1980s, unless you talk about the 1982 season when they only played 9 games because of a strike. So, the best defense of the whole decade when it comes to not surrendering points. They weren't they weren't blitzing essentially every play before, but they still statistically were surrendering less points. So what happens in this game? I still can't fathom. Or I watch it back and I'm like, what the fuck is going on? Now, see, to me, Jay Schrader was the guy, when I started watching, he lost his job to Doug Williams. I guess I started watching the next season when I retained it. Then he was the guy with the Raiders who never lived up to his potential. So I'm like, I always had this. I remember Jay Schrader starting in the 1990 AFC title game in Buffalo, and they go up there and lose 51-3. But again, maybe if Bo doesn't get hurt against the Bengals. But even then I thought, well, they have Marcus Allen, though. This is going to be a game. And it wasn't, So the point is, I didn't respect Schrader. He was really, really conceited. In the pregame, if you go back and watch this, he says, I can beat the blitz. I can beat their blitz. I'll be fine. That reminds me of like Jim Miller in 2001 when the Bears go to the playoffs. And he says, well, why would – because there were talks – Tom Brady took over for Drew Bledsoe that year when he got hurt, and you know the story of Tom Brady, of course. But so now you've got a franchise quarterback, or what people think is a franchise quarterback of Drew Bledsoe, and they're obviously going to trade him. So there were trade rumors that maybe the Bears would be interested in Drew Bledsoe. And Jim Miller said in an interview on Fox that he was better than Drew Bledsoe. That's probably all you need to know about Jim Miller. That's why he's so conceited on Twitter and on these various shows. I rooted for the guy. I bought his jersey in 2002, opening day when they beat Minnesota. He threw the touchdown to David Terrell. But man, was he confident. Maybe more so than kind of like Sean Salisbury, another guy that is like, you really can't back up all the shit that you talk. Now, Jay Schrader was of that same ilk. And he said he'd beat the blitz, and he fucking did. Now you look at his stats off the top of my head again, he threw for like less than 200 yards. But he was in complete control of the game. A couple of drives. He led an 83-yard drive that culminated in a George Rogers touchdown. So you got this great defense in play. Great defense. They're stopping everybody, and they can't stop Jay Schrader. He is killing them. They're in complete control, even though the scoreboard said otherwise, 13-7. But the feel, it was just completely different. It's like after Tyson lost to Douglas in Japan, and then he came back, but it's just that aura of invincibility was gone. And I'm not sure why it was gone this day, but it was. And it's like gone forever when Jay Schrader, of all people, he's lighting you up. He's throwing touchdowns to Art Monk. He's beating your blitz. He's leading long drives. And that's something that's never really dissected. What the fuck is going on? Somebody please hit Jay Schrader. Jay fucking Schrader. Somebody please knock him on his ass. See, in 1986, as you know, Charles Martin can hit quarterbacks. You can do a lot of shit that you can't get away with today. So you can knock his fucking dick on the turf, man. That's something I wanted to see touched on these documentaries. What the fuck happened to the defense here today? They're just lit up. And to Singletary's credit, after the game's over, he comes out, does an interview with his helmet on. He's respectful like he always is. Mike's a guy I think that deserves so much more credit historically, but I think because his coaching career didn't go the way it possibly could have or should have, that people sort of shit on his legacy now, and that's unfortunate. Because to me, and this is going to make some people unhappy, but I feel that Singletary is heads and shoulders above Brian Urlacher. I think Singletary was undersized, middle linebacker, is the heart in a lot of ways of the team, but that's also going to lead to a significant part of their demise here, as it will touch with Wilbur. But anyway, Singletary's a stand-up guy. He comes out and he just gives them credit. But basically in 86, another argument to make is they only played a couple of teams with winning records and had 2 losses. To the Rams, the team they had busted up in the 85 title game. I think Minnesota beat them. And of course, they beat Cleveland, whom had a winning record. But for the most part, their schedule was relatively weak that season. Of course, you had 2 games with Tampa, Detroit, Minnesota, Green Bay. They were playing the AFC Central, which would have been Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Houston. Who else would have been in the division back then? And Cleveland. Okay, so they didn't have the best schedule in the world, so maybe they were exposed. I don't know. But it's 27-13. It's a final, and it just feels worse than that score. I always hear Bill Parcells, when they talk about the 85 game with the Giants, say if we'd have played that game, if they'd have just kept playing that game, they could have scored 100 before we could have gotten to 10. And they would have beaten us 99 out of 100 times. Whatever happened that day, if they kept playing for 7 quarters, I don't think that the Bears defense was going to stop Jay Schroeder. And I just can't believe I'm saying that. For whatever reason, that day, they were like a fucking floppy cock who couldn't get erect. I don't know what's happening, but the defense let the team down there, not just Flutie. And I loved it. I mean, we're Bears fans. We love defense. But I think that's a significant point. You take an average quarterback at best. On his best day, he's average, and you make him look not as good as Montana in 2 years coming into the title game, but you make him look like he's a significant player. Of course, Redskins would go on to get annihilated by the Giants the following week, and the Giants would beat Elway in the Super Bowl in Pasadena, where you just felt like the Bears should have been. But, okay, so they're not. We go on to 87. Now what? Now what's going on? 87, a couple things are happening. For one, you got 5 quarterbacks now. And there's a cover of Sports Illustrated, The Wounded Bear. Will Jim McMahon play in 1987? You don't know. I mean, he's still coming back from that dirty play in November with Charles Martin. So they've still got Flutie, they've got Steve Fuller, they've got Mike Tomczak, obviously McMahon, and they draft Jim Harbaugh, whom you may know now as a coach. But if you're a younger Bears fan, maybe you don't recall that he was actually the Bears' first-round draft pick out of Michigan in 87. So they've got all these quarterbacks. Now, and Harbaugh was 14 that year, which is 4 every other year. Anyway, so you got to figure out what's going to happen with the quarterbacks. Eventually, Flutie gets the axe. Fuller gets the axe. So they're going to go with Tomczak to start the year, and Harbaugh, and then Jim's kind of waiting in the wings. So that's where you are quarterback-wise. Walter. And Jeff Pearlman wrote a book a couple of years ago that a lot of Bears fans didn't like because it criticized Walter, and we all love Walter. How could you not love Walter? Walter just, it sounds like a cliche, but Walter, like when I'm going through hard times, I don't want to sound like Tomlinson or somebody that says this, like on his like NFL network, what's it called, A Football Life. I don't want to sound like I'm just saying, regurgitating someone else's shit is what I'm saying. But if I'm going through something like a divorce and you hear Walter talk or see his highlights, it is inspirational. Watching him run up that fucking hill, man, I mean, God, it's almost like our Rocky. You know, like as a Bears fans, it's almost like our Rocky because Walter's not a big dude. He's 5'10". He's just, you know, he's the best. So he's our guy, but he had a significant drop-off between 86 and 87. And one thing that I always was, I think it's kind of weird, is that even now if you go to Walter's Wikipedia or in the Bears, like Shane Marsaw bought me the Bears scrapbook, the 100th centennial. They talk about Walter being born in 1954. And you say, well, how's that significant? But we know now, I mean, from Jeff Pearlman's book, Walter was actually born in 53. Walter went to Jackson State, as you know, smaller school, and they were trying to give him some tread and they're trying to get him into the Heisman Trophy talk. And they wanted him to seem younger. I forget the rationale behind it. But the point is, they lied about Walter's age. So he was born in 53 when he's drafted in 75. So he's 22 when he's drafted. So by the time 87 runs around, he's going to be 34. Even though they all say he's 33. But he was actually born in 53, apparently. Unless I've just bought into some propagated myth, I choose to believe the credibility of Mr. Pearlman. It's long, detailed, explaining why they did it and everything. So I'm saying Walter is 34 and time caught up with him. And there's going to be a strike in 87, much like 82, but they're going to have replacement players, which is going to be very significant. But I'm just saying Walter wasn't the same guy from 86 until 87 because, time takes us all, right? And man, a big fumble. That's something else in the 86 playoff game against the Redskins. They were driving and Walter fumbled and Washington recovered. He fumbled in the NFC Championship game in 85. He fumbled in the Super Bowl. Look, I love Walter. Walter's the best. I'm not besmirching Walter Payton at all. I'm just trying to give you context and say that Walter wasn't Walter by 87. And he's feeling all this pressure that the Bears more or less want him to retire. They want him to retire a Bear. They don't want him going anywhere else. And they're trying to talk him into just stepping away. And they want to play Neil Anderson. But they don't want to disrespect Walter because he's fucking Walter. But having said that, the goal is to put Neil Anderson in, who was our number one draft pick out of Florida in 86. We're going to play him some more now. But we'll play him at fullback, even though that's not really his position because you can't make Walter be a reserve. It'd have been like if Jordan would have stuck around with the Bulls. Let's say he plays out like the Washington era, all that. Let's just say he stays with the Bulls the whole time. And maybe like 2003 or 4, he's still there, and he's not the guy from 98. And are you going to ask him to sit? Is he going to be the sixth man? I mean, he's doubt. Kareem played to 42 with the Lakers. He still started. You can't make your legend take a back seat. And the Bears didn't want to do that. So they're playing Walter and Neil Anderson at the same time. But again, Walter's lost a step by this point. And the quarterback situation is in flux. But still, they start the season beautifully. The defending Super Bowl champions, the Giants, come to Soldier Field on Monday Night Football. They haven't played since the 85 game when the Bears beat them 21-0 on Soldier Field. Second round of the playoffs, 85. And, of course, they're Super Bowl champs now. So it's like Super Bowl 21 and a half, the championship game that we should have gotten in 86. If the Bears just take care of business and play Jay Schrader. But, so, they come out and they just beat Sims into submission again. Pardon me. I don't hate Phil Simms. A lot of people do. I think Phil... he'll just tell you they're fucking great. And Otis Wilson wrote a book, and he said that Phil was scared and was always a pussy, and maybe all that's true. I mean, I'm not questioning Otis Wilson. Fuck no. But Phil gets sacked I think 7 times, and then the backup comes in, which maybe was that Jeff Rutledge off the top of my head. And they sacked him a few times. Phil got knocked out, came back in, and then left again. The Bears just pound them into fucking submission, like 9 or 10 sacks overall, and they win the game easily. I'm off the top of my head again, close to 17 points, and this is on national television. So it looks like, boy, the Bears are fucking back. They are back. Oh, you know what? I glossed over something again that I shouldn't have. The 85 team had, or didn't have, Al Harris and Todd Bell, the late Todd Bell. But Al Harris was he the second round pick in 79? Because Dan Hampton was first. Or maybe they had 2 number ones. But Al Harris, I think, was the second player selected by the Bears in 79. And he was a stud on the 84 team. But they held out. So in 85, Wilbur Marshall becomes the starter because Al Harris held out and didn't get the ring. And the same could be said for Todd Bell, and that gives us Dave Duerson. The late Dave Duerson had such a sad demise to his life with the CTE and alleged CTE and shotgun in the chest. But point is, Todd Bell comes back in 86. Todd Bell is Buddy's guy. Now, I know Buddy's gone, but everyone knows the hit he put on Joe Washington in 84. And a significant point to be made in 86 is he comes back. He was like your guy. He's your safety. He's the guy that's knocking people's heads off. And Ditka, it would seem, was kind of petty and just didn't want to play him, but just like punishing him and didn't give him his job back and had him wasting away on special teams and basically didn't play him the whole year. I don't know if it was like out of punishment or pettiness or whatever. I get that Dave earned the job, but maybe Todd Bell should have played alongside him instead of, and we all love Gary as well, but still maybe he's better than Fensick at his age at that point. I don't know. But I'm just saying Todd Bell felt disrespected, didn't get to play. Then 87, he sort of is put back in the lineup, but I don't want to speak for a gentleman that's not here, but maybe he lost his mojo, his step, his confidence, what have you, but he's not the same guy that we've last seen in 84. And when Todd jumps to Philly the next season, he's going to let you know that he felt that the Bears wasted his career and they wasted his potential, and it is really sore about it when he goes in 88. But in 87, so they get Todd Bell back, and he's going to start something like 11 or 12 of the 15 games because there's going to be one game they don't play because of the strike. But I'm saying that's a huge asset that they aren't taking advantage of. But then comes the strike. So they beat the Giants. They humiliate the Giants. Everything's going well. And the strike comes. And they have these replacement players. And they ended up getting some good players out of that. I think Glenn Kozlowski, what was it, Wojciechowski, the lineman. They retained these guys after the strike, but they were known as the Spare Bears, including Sean Payton, who, of course, you know from the Saints Super Bowl winning coach. And he was a replacement player as a quarterback. And I think were the Bears 2-1, I think, with the Spare Bears. But Ditka came out and said that the Spare Bears were the real Bears. I don't know Mike's motivation behind that. At the time, maybe he's just trying to say, hey, these are the Bears that are here, and I have to coach these guys up. But from all accounts, everybody heard that. Everybody felt that. Everybody felt just incredibly disrespected by the comments. And it sort of killed the chemistry, combined with the fact that Mike, as it's been pointed out many times, was taking all these endorsement deals and telling the guys not to do it, but doing it himself, so it's deemed as hypocritical. But he really has a divide with the Spare Bears comment. But the season's going to restart again. By this time, because of the break, the week's off, and now we're in mid-October, late October, McMahon's actually healthy. Or as healthy as he's going to be. He's coming back. They're in Tampa at the Big Sombrero, as Chris Berman used to call it. And, man, I love Berman. Him and Tom Jackson. But so they're going to play McMahon, but they're not going to start. You got to feel bad for Tom Zach. He's like, I'm doing my best. And now, although he and Jim were tight, though. Doing my best, and now they're going to bring McMahon in at some point. Well, some point comes in the second half, I think, off the time, because Tampa's got a big lead. Tampa's up by like 20, 21. And Jim's going to come in and lead a big comeback. In his first game back, McMahon is going to lead a miracle akin to the one in Minnesota in 85 and bring them back. Of course, it's against Tampa Bay, who was, not exactly a good franchise in 1987, so it doesn't get the kind of hype. But maybe it would have had they ended up doing something in the postseason. But McMahon has an incredible stretch of games. He comes back. He leads this more than 14 points down in Tampa because they did have defensive or special teams touchdown somewhere in there to bring them back closer. But they're going to come back all the way to win the game. He throws a pass to Neil Anderson, a screen, and Neil dives into the end zone, and that was the winning touchdown. Next week, they're against, is it Kansas City or Green Bay? I think it's Green Bay. They have 3 straight games in a row where McMahon leads big comebacks. Against Kansas City's at Soldier Field, and he's going to lead. They're going to be down like 14 in the fourth quarter and come back and win. They're going to be down at Lambeau Field and have to drive down the field, and Butler's going to hit a big field goal and allegedly flip off Forrest Gregg after he hits it from 52 yards out. It's good. I can hear Pat Summerall's call in my head. So Jim comes back. He leads 3 comebacks immediately. So it's like, man, they got the defense. Maybe the Spare Bears thing will blow over. They got a good defense, but they go to Denver, snow game, Monday Night Football. Not so much. It's not like covered in snow, but it's a little bit snowing. It's cold. But Jim's in a shootout with Elway, and Jim throws for over 300 yards, and I think the final's like 31-29. And this is the first time McMahon is going to be beaten as starter since what, like 83? 28 straight wins. He's going to finish 46-15 in the regular season as a Bears starter. 46 and 5th fucking team. Dude deserves more credit than what he gets. But they're going to lose because in Chicago we can't kick, man. Kevin Butler, we love him because he hung around so long. He's part of the team, and he's missing a lot of kicks. I mean, he misses 2 extra points in this game, and we lose by 2 points. He missed a kick or 2 in the 86 playoff game with Washington. He's missing a lot of kicks. God, off the top of my head, against the Raiders in 93, Soldier Field, he misses 2 kicks. Harbaugh leads 2 drives to beat the Raiders, and he misses both of them. 91 against the Dolphins, no good at Soldier Field. He misses. Butler missed a lot of fucking kicks, but cost us the game in Denver. But what starts to happen now, Otis Wilson hurts his knee a little bit. He's out 3 or 4 weeks. McMahon gets banged up again. But what was really critical is down the stretch against the Seahawks, Neil Anderson gets hurt real late in the season. Like, again, they had 15 games, so this is the next to last one, I think, and they close the year out with the Raiders. So Neil's going to hurt almost like an injury similar to what Cutler had, wink, wink. Cutler was really hurt in 2010, but it was a grade 2 like tear or something. So Neil's hurt and going to miss the playoffs, and that is significant because Walter, as I stated, isn't Walter anymore. I mean, he's always Walter in aura, but he's just a little bit older now. But capable, sure. But if you have Neil Anderson in that playoff game, Neil's catching, he's running, and he's certainly a decoy for Walter. Like, you could fake it to Neil and maybe run some traps or some sweeps with Walter. A lot of offense could have been utilized if Neil's in the game, but he's not. So eventually, Ditka and Otis Wilson are going to get into a huge argument too. Even now, like, Otis in his book basically said that Ditka was a racist, and they almost got into a fight. But going into the playoff game, Otis thinks he's ready to go, and yet he's starting Ron Rivera, whom we all like. The staff with Lovey, last week he helped us with a timeout, helped the Bears get their kicking situation underway. But he's not Otis Wilson on the field. He's not. I guess I should touch too. William Perry, whom we all love as the Fridge, is really getting out of shape as well, and is not even, like in the Denver game, they give him a handoff. He didn't even do it in all of 86, and then 87 they try to let him score from the goal line. He fumbles. So the magic just isn't there anymore, plus he's too heavy. And again, you have, like I was saying before, you had Todd Bell, who could have been utilized as a big hitter, but instead you're not using him. Now you're not using Otis. And you've made the Spare Bears comment, and we go into the playoff game. McMahon is going to come back. I don't know how they lost this game. I said in 86 that the Bears just were outplayed, were dominated by Jay Schroeder. They were. The 87 team should have gone to Super Bowl 22. It's worse than the 18 Bears with Parkey. It really is. They have look, it's cold as shit. It's like 10 degrees. And Washington's coming back to Chicago, the team that knocked you out the year before. They're coming back, and it's at our place, you know? So they're going to win this. They got McMahon coming back. They've only been beaten with McMahon one time in 4 years. You can't lose. It's a revenge game. It is going – what's going to happen? It's going to be a slaughter. It's going to be redemption. It's going to be time to atone. Instead, well, no, the Bears come out 14-0. 14-0. McMahon throws a touchdown. Was it to Ron Morris on a slant? But he's going to sustain a big hit on that shoulder to the point where he's down when they're showing Morris score in the end zone. And one of the Bears linemen, maybe Covert, bends down on his knees and just is like, oh shit, and like goes to get Jim and picks him up. And the point is, McMahon, his arm is dinged up now. The Bears are up 14-0 in the second quarter. Shouldn't be an issue. That should be the game. That should be the game right there. It's cold. It's bear weather. You got a 14-point lead. You can't lose this lead. Not at home. Not at home. But McMahon, I can't throw now. And he also has a pulled hamstring. He pulled his hamstring in Minnesota in the Metrodome, the famous Roller Dome clip with Ditka on skates mocking the Metrodome. That's the game McMahon got hurt in. So he's got a pulled hamstring. The 85 McMahon's running all over the place on the Rams defense to start the game, wins the NFC Championship game on the cover of Sports Illustrated, diving into the end zone. But now he's got limited mobility, and his shoulder's hurt again. The one is taking him a year to come back from. And you've got Walter in his last game ever, literally, who had a fine first half. But as the game is progressing, the Washington defense can sense that McMahon is incapable of throwing. Maybe Mike should bring in Tomczak at this point, Mike being Mike Ditka. Maybe. I don't know. But maybe you say Jim's the leader and you keep him in. Somehow, the defense allows Doug Williams, who I'm not going to besmirch at all. He's better than Jay Schroeder overall, in my opinion. But they allow Doug Williams to bring the Skins all the way back to 14-0 before halftime. And then Darrell Green is actually going to get hurt on a punt return, hurt his ribs. I think he missed the championship game next week too. Leaping, and he's going to score in a punt return touchdown. So your 14-point lead is gone. And the Bears are going to lose this game 21-17 ultimately. There's a sequence late in the game where McMahon has driven down the field, and there appears to be a miscommunication with himself and I guess Willie Gault, and gets intercepted in the end zone. That could have been the turning point in the game. It looked like Jim was mad and thought that Willie should have gone the other way, or just the look on his face was like, oh fuck. But I could be reading too much into it. I didn't think that he thought it was necessarily his fault. But either way, the game's going to end. You have the iconic sadness from Walter with his head into his hands, sitting there. It's also Gary Fensick's last game, and that was a lot of Bears' last games. But specifically that day, it's going to be Fensick and Walter's last day. It's just unimaginable that they could lose to Washington again. And if they win, they're going to host the NFC title game against Minnesota. Why? Because Minnesota went out to San Francisco, who was the number one seed, and Anthony fucking Carter, which I don't want to shit on Anthony Carter because Chris Carter ended up being the better of the two after he left Philly, and you kind of forgot about AC, but he had 2 or 3 years where he was, Minnesota's number one guy, and he was undersized, but he had like 220 yards receiving. And they go to Candlestick and they win. So Minnesota's coming to Chicago for the NFC Championship game. If they can just hold on and beat the fucking Redskins again. Again, they lose to the Redskins. God, and they lose a McMahon too, and it just seems like, what is going on here? But still, we're talking about a team that just won the Super Bowl 2 years before at an average age of 24. You don't have to blow it up yet. You don't. But, so Neil Anderson's going to be your guy next year because Walter's retired. Wilber Marshall. This is going to be the start of what they call Plan B. There's never really been free agency at this juncture, but he can get an offer somewhere else. And a restricted free agent, essentially, you can match it, and he has to stay. Or you can let him sign a sheet and go somewhere, and then you get compensated with draft picks. So Wilber, at this point, the Bears, on paper, going back to 85, other than maybe the Giants with Carl Banks and LT and like Pepper Johnson, maybe they've got the best linebackers, but arguably the Bears do. Singletary, Otis, and Wilber Marshall. Put it to you this way. Wilber's going to go to Washington. He's going to be the top paid player in the NFL on defense when he signs a deal. Even greater than Lawrence Taylor, who at that time was the dominant guy in the NFL on defense. He won a fucking MVP, the league MVP. Only Lawrence Taylor and Alan Page have done that in the Super Bowl era. To be the defensive guy winning the whole fucking thing with the MVP. So, Wilber's going to go to Washington for like $6 million a year. The worst part about that is, other than losing him, is they didn't want to match the offer because they said we already paid Singletary. It's exactly what McMahon said would happen in the book. Now, for years, the McCaskies were vilified for things like this, and rightfully so. I don't think that that's the way it is now. They spend money. George cares. Hell, I think Virginia cares, but they were fighting over ownerships then. I remember George's son they dug his body up. Like, weird shit was happening. Arguments were happening on who owned the team. And anyway, ownership wasn't necessarily committed to paying guys and winning at this juncture. So Wilber's allowed to leave. I think the most asinine part of it was the explanation was that Singletary had a contract that basically said if you re-sign Wilber, for example, you have to give Mike Singletary a raise too, because Singletary has to be the highest paid linebacker on the team. So they don't want to re-sign Wilber, your top guy that you drafted in number 1 overall in 1984. Arguably, if you listen to Otis Wilson, the best player, way better than Singletary. That's what Otis thought. Otis thought he was better than Singletary too. Maybe he was. That's straight out of Otis's book. But Wilber goes because they don't want to give Singletary a raise too. They don't want to put that much money into the linebackers. But the critical thing is this. So you go from having arguably the best 3 linebackers in all of football in the preseason in Dallas. Otis is going to tear his knee up. He already had that drama with Mike in 87 anyway. So chemistry's already hurt. Feelings are already hurt. Animosity is already is in place. And now he tears his knee up. He's only going to play one more game ever. He's going to try to come back in 89 with the Raiders, play one game, and ends up retiring. So, that's something else I skipped over. The Bears corner, Leslie Frazier, whom we know for later coaching in the league, coming from Lovey's Tampa 2 scheme. He was in Minnesota. He was in Tampa as an assistant, but he was the head guy with the Vikings. He got hurt in Super Bowl 20 on a special teams play when the Bears were up 155-3, I think, at that point. And a meaningless play later in the game and got hurt and never could come back. Not to say he was a shutdown corner, but, he was definitely not replaced by Vesty Jackson. So, anyway, I digress off of that point. What I'm saying, though, with the linebackers. So now you're down Otis, for the season forever. He's never going to play another Bear game. You've let Wilbur go. And now you got Mike Singletary with Ron Rivera and a 4th-round draft pick in Jim Morrissey. I'm not shitting on Jim Morrissey, but he's not Otis Wilson. He's not Wilbur Marshall. And neither is Ron Rivera. So now you've taken your best asset, potentially, your linebackers, your crew, they're broken up. Willie Gault is going to ask for a trade because of his salary and the fact that he'd rather be on the West Coast so it'd be easier for him to pursue acting. But let's be honest. If Willie's making $300,000, which, I don't know what that would equate to in today's money, but in 1988, that's, it would be significantly higher if you want to adjust it. But still, if you gave him a little bit more, he would compensate. If he's compensated, he's going to be like, okay, fuck it, I'll go play for the Raiders later. You're going to give me a big raise, then yeah, I'll stay. And you could have. Didn't want to pay him. So they're going to get a 1st-round pick for Willie. They're going to get 2 1st-round picks in compensation for Wilbur Marshall. So it seems like, well, maybe you can stay young that way. But if you look at their upcoming draft picks, Donnell Wilford was a good corner. He undersized. He played for a while. Wendell Davis was a good receiver. He had a terrible injury in Philly to end his career. Brad Muster was looked like a good player. He just could never stay healthy. These are Trace Armstrong. These are guys that the Bears would take with these picks. And then ultimately, John Roper, they started to draft poorly. So they got these draft picks, but they didn't actually take advantage of them. A couple of years later, they're going to draft Stan Thomas, just an unmitigated disaster in 91. So they let their guys go, but they didn't adequately replace them. And that's not shitting on Ron Morris at wide receiver, but he's not Willie Gault. And McKinnon's arguing, Dennis McKinnon, who we know yelled at Braggs' wife a couple of years ago. But Dennis McKinnon, before he was yelling at people for touching his car, was calling out Ditka for shitty play calling and saying that the defense needed to blitz more. So he's kind of on his way out too. But at the time, you still got Dennis Gentry, who's been shifted to wide receiver at this point, along with Wendell Davis and Ron Morris and who else would have been wide receiver then? And I guess Kozlowski. But anyway, it's not the crew that you'd like. Willie would have made a huge difference. That's what I'm saying. But so now you've gotten rid of Gault, you've gotten rid of Marshall, Fensick's retired, Walter's retired. Todd Bell signs with Philadelphia. Al Harris is going to follow in 89. He's got one more year up. 88, despite all this, despite wholesale changes, despite Mike Ditka having a heart attack, he's going to have what's described as a minor heart. How do you have a minor heart attack? That's like saying, my dick wouldn't stay hard while I was fucking, but it's only minor. No, that's a big deal. I don't know. That's a terrible equation there, or analogy. But the point is, Ditka has a heart attack. Ditka's actually going to win Coach of the Year because of all the people they've lost. They're going to be 12-4. McMahon's going to get hurt, as irony is irony, man. And karma from the Patriots fans, because they talk so much shit in the Super Bowl. McMahon is going to go to New England and get hurt, and the Bears are going to be blown out in New England by Doug Flutie. The guy McMahon basically had the team hating and everybody blamed for the 86 loss, and they're going to get blown out at Sullivan Stadium in Jim McMahon's last start in the regular season as a Bear. By Doug Flutie. But that's in late October. Tom Zach's going to play the rest of the regular season, and the Bears are going to score more points, actually, than they did with McMahon, even though they're winning with Jim. But they're 12-4. They're the number one seed. Significantly terrible thing happens late in the year that's I mean, massive, and probably the number one point. Richard Dent, who is in the Hall of Fame, but still somehow seems underrated. Guy's getting 10, 12, 13, 14 sacks a year, 17 sacks. A couple of times. Just unblockable. I think he broke his leg. So you got, by this point, Dan Hampton is really old and really hurt. And just being a man, being everything he wanted Jim to be in 86 from his thought. You got Hampton on his last leg. Wilbur's gone. Otis is hurt. Todd Bell's gone. Leslie Frazier's gone. And now your pass rusher's gone. Richard Dent. William Perry's hurt. The fridge is too heavy. And the replacements aren't exactly household names, you know. They're going to beat Buddy in the Fog Bowl, as everybody knows. Tom Zach's going to start that game, and he's going to get banged up late. I think Reggie White is on him. So going into the NFC Championship game, there was this question of who was going to be the starter. Would it be McMahon, who's been saying, hey, I'm ready to go, and he finished out the Fog Bowl? Or do you give it back to Tom Zach, who's saying, no, I can go. He's like, what do I have to do to be the starter here, even though there's no feud at all between he and McMahon? But I think Ditka's going to look at it and say, well, you know what? Jim beat San Francisco in Chicago in the 83 season. We didn't have him in 84 in the title game. We got blown out. We beat him in Candlestick in 85 with Jim, and we beat him in 88 with Jim on Monday Night Football. I think it was on my birthday, born on Halloween. I'm pretty sure that was on my birthday, unless it's a faulty memory. I think that was on my 8th birthday. But I think it was 10-9. I know I watched that game. But I think it was on my birthday. But so McMahon has never been beaten by San Francisco. So he's going to turn to Jim and say, okay, we get that McMahon magic. And we're going to win. It's going to be cold. It's bear weather again. It's freezing. It's windy. There's no way we're going to lose. We've overcome Buddy. We've overcome the heart attack. I'm coach of the year. We're going to win. So the 49ers come in town. And this would be Jim McMahon's final game as a Bear, because he's going to be traded to San Diego in the 89 preseason, which pretty much is the death nail for the team, between that and Dan Hampton being hurt again in 89. But title game rolls around. Earlier in that game, I talked about 88, where the Bears won. Basically, San Francisco was max protecting with their line coverage from the Bears' pass rush, spearheaded by Richard Dent. And they really weren't taking any shots. They were afraid of Dent. They are. Well, Dent's gone. So now they're taking shots, and they're killing us. The worst safety I'd ever seen in my life. God, I can never think of his name. He's Crum. Was it Crum? He was number 44. He has the worst effort on a play ever with Jerry Rice. He splits 2 defenders, including this fucking scrub, and goes all the way immediately early in the second quarter, and you're like, uh-oh. So they're not afraid of the Bears' pass rush. They're throwing, man. Montana's just throwing against the wind, and it's ironic because I was reading that Centennial book that the Bears wanted to draft Montana and then didn't. But he was on their draft board, and that's the guy they wanted, and then they didn't take him, inexplicably. Same season, 79, they could have drafted for Ken Stabler, or traded for Ken Stabler. The Raiders were trying to trade him. They made the playoffs that year. I mean, maybe if they have Stabler or certainly Montana, then maybe they do something. They almost beat Philly in a wild card game as it was. 89. Okay, or 79. But to close out this year, 88, they're going to lose at home 28-3. NFC Championship game. I mean, you can't just act like that didn't happen. It's not because Buddy left. They're defensively in 86, they're better. 87, they lose to a team they shouldn't lose to in Washington. 88, maybe, I'm saying if Dent plays, maybe they don't lose. I don't know. But Montana, they couldn't stop. And now the era is basically over. Because McMahon's gone, Wilbur's gone, Gault's gone. Otis is gone. Like I said, Todd Bell's gone. And pretty soon, Dennis McKinnon's going to be gone. It's just like McMahon said. They were going to the front office who would not pay their players, and they would break up the team. 89 rolls around. They're 4-0 with Mike Tomczak. Finished the year 6-10. Hampton gets hurt. Bears say, Ditka says we may not win another game, and they fucking didn't. 90, they go to the second round. Then they put out 31-3 by West Virginia's own Jeff Hostetler. And they win the Super Bowl, the Giants do. 91, they lose to the Cowboys. And 92, the Bears are 5-11, and Ditka's gone. So it's hard to pinpoint one thing, but it's way more complicated and nuanced. I'm at an hour and 6 minutes already as I look at my counter. Shit, I need to do my radio show tonight and go to my other job. But it's way more complicated than to say why they didn't go to the Super Bowl. Well, Buddy should have stayed and they'd have won 3 Super Bowls. Lots of other things should have happened there. Lots of other things terribly had to go awry for them not to win. Quick recap. 86 team, McMahon's shoulder. They could have diagnosed it sooner and said, hey, man, you're hurt. You really are hurt. Give him some respect. And he maybe doesn't have the Charles Martin game. Maybe he's shelved for a few more weeks. He comes back healthy. Even so, maybe you don't play Doug Flutie. And for fuck's sake, why can't you stop Jay Schrader in the playoff game? 87? And don't overlook Walter's fumble late in the game. 87, again, Neil Anderson gets hurt. If Neil plays in the Redskin game, maybe things are dramatically different. But even so, you had a 14-0 lead. 14-0 lead at home. The feud between Ditka and Otis. Just play him, man. Put fucking Otis in the game. I mean, he was playing some, but he's not starting, and he feels disrespected. Todd Bell along the way. Maybe you don't lose Leslie Frazier in the Super Bowl. The stupid, end-around play, whatever it was, on special teams. Again, McMahon hurt his hamstring and his shoulder in that game as well. Fluke play, a pass. Could have been the game-winning touchdown, but it gets picked off in the end zone. Punt return by Darrell Green shouldn't have happened. They shouldn't have lost to the Redskin team. Think about McMahon's legacy in general. If he leads that team to the next week against Minnesota, and I think because of familiarity alone, they're going to beat the Vikings at home. They're going to. They're going to go to Super Bowl 22. They've already played Denver in Denver at Mile High and lost because of 2 missed extra points. Arguably, they're going to beat the Broncos in the Super Bowl. They're going to win another Super Bowl in 87. Walter's going to score that touchdown. And then the whole story is rewritten. Mike, the 85 thing with Walter not scoring, not an issue anymore. He goes out a champion. McMahon is revered for winning multiple championships. Ditka is viewed as an all-time great now, but imagine if he had multiple championships. Do they blow it up? What if they win the second Super Bowl? Do they say, fuck it, let's keep it together, let's go for a third, let's re-sign Wilbur? Maybe. But you can't let Wilbur walk, and they do. You can't trade Willie and not replace him. It's a couple of years ago I know that the Bears, why they did it, but you saw they suffered when they got rid of Jeffrey, whom I hated, and Brandon Marshall, whom a lot of people hated, but I liked B. Marsh, but I understand why they got rid of him. So you get, and Martellus Bennett, when you got rid of all those guys, was it Nagy called them turds? Not them specifically, but we don't have any turds on the team anymore. Point is, they got rid of those guys and didn't really replace them, and it hurt them for a few years. And that's sort of what's happened here when you lose Galt. And then you're going to lose McKinnon. And another thing that scares me, as I close this out, think about this. The Super Bowl's in Miami this year, right? 85, where do they lose their game at? The Orange Bowl, right? They lose their only loss of the years to the Dolphins. Everybody knows that. Monday Night Football. 88, title game. They lose to San Francisco. That game would have been in Miami at Joe Robbie Stadium. 06, go to the Super Bowl. Where do we go? Miami. Fucking monsoon. Rains the whole game. Rex can't throw. because of the rain or Benson gets hurt. I was a Thomas Jones guy, but I'm saying Benson got hurt in the first quarter, something that's always, again, ignored now. And they can key on Thomas Jones because we can't throw the ball. We lose. A game we are up 14-6, and we fucking lose Super Bowl. Also in Miami. So I'm scared of fucking death of Miami. Maybe. Look what happens last year in Miami. Go down there, it's hot and fucking weird plays start happening. We lose to the Dolphins. You win that game, maybe you're the second seed, and we're not even playing the Eagles for Parkey to miss that extra point. The Giants game, too. It would exercise some demons with me if they could go and win the Super Bowl in Miami this year. But that's essentially my take on it. There's a lot of different things that went into it to say why this team didn't win multiple championships, to steal a cliche from Phil Emery. McMahon is traded to San Diego. Tom, Zach, and Harbaugh don't live up to their potential. Like maybe Mike's undrafted, maybe he doesn't have but Harbaugh's a first-round pick. Now, he did some good things with the Colts, led them to the AFC Championship game in 1995, won two playoff games, rather, on the road in San Diego and Kansas City. And Kansas City was the number one seed in the AFC that year. So he was called Captain Comeback. He did some good things, but he lost the playoff game with the Bears in 91, the game where Waddle got hurt so infamously, and we lost that game because of Harbaugh's throws. Several interceptions. 3? So the front office, the thesis is the front office let this team down. They didn't re-sign Wilbur. They traded Galt. They got rid of McMahon. Walter retired. Fenwick retires. Todd Bell leaves. Al Harris leaves in 89. And these guys aren't replaced. Not properly. Not with players that were better than them or at least equivalent to them. They're not replaced. So that's really the story. And Charles Martin. Charles Martin's a story because you took your guy, whether people want to shit on him now or not, he was definitely a franchise quarterback at that time in Jim McMahon. Without question. Unequivocally, he was a franchise quarterback to me. And like I said, was never really the same. But ironically, would sign with Minnesota in 1993. This is an urban legend. Ditka was going to bring McMahon back. There's an interview with Jim the day Ditka gets fired on YouTube. Right now, you can go look it up. And they were saying that there was a rumor that McMahon makes a comment like, yeah, he was going to bring me back, so that's probably why they fired him. But they were going to bring McMahon back in 93. Ditka wanted to bring McMahon back and say, fuck Harbaugh right now. And he gets fired, and Jim goes to Minnesota. Guess what? Sweeps the Bears. Beats them in week 2 in the Metrodome 10-7, and then a Monday night game against the Bears in Chicago later that year. Goes to the playoffs. The Bears don't in Wani's first year. So he starts against the Bears 2 times in his career. He wins both games. Of course he does. So Charles Martin in the front office, I guess, and Richard Dent's injury in 88 is significant. So it's just so much to it. It's so much easier to say, well, old Buddy left. And maybe if Buddy does stay, it does negate a lot of these flaws. But Vince Tobin, certainly not Buddy Ryan. But hopefully you enjoyed the ride along with me as we look back at the 85, 86, 87, 88 Bears and figure what the fuck happened. What happened? Neil Anderson did some good things. Brad Muster couldn't stay healthy. The guys they brought in just weren't the guys they had before. All right, so there you go. As I trailed off at the end, those weren't the same guys they brought in before. It's true, though. But, I mean, just talking about it made me crestfallen. Be well. Go Bears. Let me let the coach say it. Go Bears!